Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian.
Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Ravi Ramineni, a pioneer in the world of soccer analytics and the architect behind the data-driven success of the Seattle Sounders. With a rich background that bridges large-scale data analysis at Microsoft and deep-rooted passion for soccer from his days growing up in India, Ravi has uniquely shaped how analytics are applied in sports today. In our discussion, Ravi takes us behind the scenes of building an athlete management system and a cutting-edge scouting and recruitment platform at the Sounders. He shares insights into how data analytics has revolutionized training decisions, injury prevention, and player acquisitions, emphasizing the critical role of accurate data interpretation to avoid costly misjudgments in player evaluations. Ravi and I also tackle the complex issue of evaluating coaching effectiveness, the quest for more predictive metrics in soccer, the enhanced need for collaboration between modelers and club decision makers, and the future possibilities with advanced tracking data. This is Learning Bayesian Statistics, episode 116, recorded June 26, 2024.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. What's a Bayesian? It's someone who cares about evidence.
Welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics, a podcast about Bayesian inference, the methods, the projects, and the people who make it possible. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country. For any info about the show, learnbayesstats.com is la place to be. Show notes, becoming a corporate sponsor, unlocking Bayesian merch, supporting the show on Patreon, everything is in there. That's learnbayesstats.com. If you're interested in one-on-one mentorship, online courses, or statistical consulting, feel free to reach out and book a call at topmate.io/Alex_Andorra. See you around, folks, and best Bayesian wishes to you all. And if today's discussion sparked ideas for your business, well, our team at PIMC Labs can help bring them to life. Check us out at pimc-labs.com. Ravi Ramineni, welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics.
Hey Alex, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. You are always a man in demand, so I am extremely honored to have you here. And thank you to Patrick Ward for putting us in contact. Patrick was here actually on LBS episode 111. For people who want to have the background about Patrick, we talked about US football and the fantastic work he's been doing at Seattle for 10 years now. And well, today we're going to talk about sport too. We're going to talk about sport that's called football too in a lot of countries. But in the US, it's known as soccer. So it's a different sport. It's not the football that Patrick loves so much. But yeah, like before that, though, can you tell us what you're doing nowadays, Ravi, and maybe briefly how you ended up working on that? Because if people want more background about how you came to work on football and so on, I will put in the show notes a great episode you did with Ted Knudson on his podcast, The Transfer Flow. That's going to be in the show notes. So feel free to keep it brief, Ravi, or tell stuff that you didn't tell yet to Ted so that it's not repetitive for you.
No, I mean, first of all, thanks to Patrick, amazing guy. I miss him. In Seattle, I used to at least meet him a few times a season and, talk shop and all that. So right now, in this moment, I am trying to narrow down my options for my next project. I just exited a startup that I co-founded called Source Football. Before that, I was working at Seattle Sounders for about 10 years, where I built their athlete management system, then scouting and recruitment platform. Before that, I was at Microsoft. So I was a program manager, but a lot of my work involved analyzing huge amounts of data that is collected on search engines, the Bing search engine, and try to understand whether a user is satisfied with a click or not. Very different than football, but it is still data analysis. But it's a different data. Yeah, so that's like my rough background. So I have a lot of proposals, a few that I sent out, a few that people have sent out to me. I'm trying to figure out based on what I want in the next few years of my life, what I want to work with. I'll still be in football, soccer, but finally narrowing down those choices. Hopefully, in the next couple of weeks, I'll have something to say what I'm doing.
Yeah. So thanks. That was a great and brief overview. So it's perfect. And again, I recommend the episode with Ted because you go in details into how the hell did you transition between Microsoft and working on search engines and now working on football. So for people interested in seniors career path, and I really love that because I've had a lot of people on the show ended up with a blend of determination and randomness in what they are doing right now, and I always love these kind of path. So yeah, definitely recommend the episode with Ted, and I'll stop the teasing here. What we are interesting here is, well, first you talked about an interesting nugget in your presentation right now, which was it sounds like it was very different what I was doing at Microsoft from what I'm doing nowadays, but it's actually not that much. And we'll get back to that because I know you have great ideas and points to make about that. But first, what we all live on here on the show is Bayesian stats. So, Ravi, do you even know what Bayesian stats are? Have you been introduced to them in your curriculum? What do you use them even in your work nowadays? What's the state of that for you?
So I was introduced to Bayes' theorem a long time ago. I would say towards the end of my high school, and my favorite subject was probability and statistics in college. So yeah, like I was introduced to that, but Bayesian statistics themselves, that's something I haven't heard or I haven't really dug into or just tried to see what it is about until I read this book, The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver. So yeah, so that's just to answer your question. Like, I know the Bayes theorem. I have used it a lot, but never kind of like learned that on the statistics side. I think a lot of my statistics background was just the frequentist, the usual stuff. And yeah, like I know the problems of that, how I try to learn it, try to learn. I think Stan is the language, right? That does. There was brief moments of my role at the Sounders where I was trying to learn to see how I could use it, because there are certain problems that once I understood how Bayesian statistics work, that they would address certain problems in a better way than, like, let's say, traditional, more frequentist approach. But I never got the time, or maybe I never had the enough of I've had the starting problem. Like I would get to a point where I hit a plateau, but I didn't have time to seek out help, and because that was not part of my day job. So it was a hard one to kind of get over. But that's something that I would love to explore, because I have a lot of questions and ideas on how to solve certain problems in football using Bayesian approach.
Yeah. So if you have questions today, feel free to ask me. That would be fun in the episode.
Yeah, maybe first, another time for that, because I think there will be like yeah. But I'm sure I will reach out to you on that. I'll take you up on the offer.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. That's always fun. And as people know, I'm a football fan, so always happy to advance the cause.
Who's your
Although
favorite team?
yeah, so that's a big problem because I am unfortunately a fan of Paris since I'm like 5 years old. And that's very hard to be a fan of Paris. I'd really, really rather be a fan of Real Madrid, for instance, or a smaller club. But Paris is really a roller coaster. And since I'm like 5, I've known everything with that club. Like we've been extremely good at the national and the European level, and then we were really near relegation at some point. And we were literally saved by a goal at the very last minute of the very last game of the season by one of the worst players of the whole season. It was like a really good illustration of football and its randomness.
Exactly.
Yeah, and well, today, and nowadays it's really hard to be a fan of Paris again. I can develop on that, but later.
Okay.
So yeah, but basically, I was actually gonna ask you if you have personally a club, because I think it's harder, at least in my experience. I don't really like having emotional attachment actually to a club. Like it's watching Paris's game for me is actually an agony, whereas watching any other team play, I love it. I love the game. And any other sports, right now I'm working in baseball and watching the Marlins and any other team, it's a real pleasure because I'm not like completely overwhelmed by emotions. So yeah, I'm curious how it is for you.
Yeah, I would say that I'm a big fan of Villarreal, which is a small team in Spain, the Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
I would say like before I started working in football, I would watch those games very differently. I think as I worked more and more years in football, I think I've gotten a little less attached to any football game, to be quite honest. I think that I've started developing that distance, and also I watch the games a little differently. But for the longest time, watching Villarreal games, even while working in football, that was a different experience for me than watching any other team. But I completely understand your how you feel about, especially if you're born and brought up near that club, and that's your club from so young. So then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's like you don't have a choice, It's like you have to still love the club, even though, like, through thick and thin. It's like you're married to the club, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And I've tried. I've been disillusioned by the club so many times. I've tried. At some point, I was like, no, I'm done. I'm not gonna watch the games anymore. And I could never do that.
Yeah.
So and how do you like that? Actually, being a bit more detached. I can definitely understand. And that's good. That's good for me. I'm happy to hear that, because maybe it will do the same for me. But yeah, how do you like that? Because I can definitely envision some people being like, oh yeah, no, I actually love that emotional attachment. I wouldn't like to be less attached.
I think it's more that I don't have the time to invest to be more emotionally attached. There was a time in my life where I didn't have to worry about so many things in football. I was only worried about watching one team, or maybe a few teams, but primarily interested in one team. Now through the job, I am living and breathing football every day. Like, I won't say 24/7, but most of my work time goes in football. So I think that now I don't have that, okay, now out of this, I need to carve out an extra time for an extra, like, an emotional experience. That's the thing. And the other thing is, as you see more and more players and more football, they are not that different, right? Like, as much as you want to think, obviously, different uniforms and different ideologies and different styles of play, but it is still football at the end. And so I think that those are things I think obviously these are things I reflect upon because I think a lot of the changes happen subconsciously. You don't know that you are actually detaching yourself until you get to a point suddenly one day when you reflect and say like, wow, this is not how I used to watch VRL games. And I used to have a ritual that I probably has done that for a good part more than 10 years, is I listen to the local radio and have the TV on with the TV muted. And that's how I listen. That's how I enjoy those games. And the video was always like 20 seconds ahead because the guys in the city, in the stadium, and and there was this directly streamed, and obviously TV has some delays, so especially with streaming platforms and all that. So that was the way I enjoyed those games. And every now and then I still do that. Like if I have a chance, the games kick off at morning time when I'm going for a run, I just switch on the game and put my headphones and just run for 2 hours, just listening to the game. But I don't do that as often as I used to do, because I used to do in the past 38 league games plus like whatever European games. I would do that for 50 times a year. But now I probably do it like 10 times a year. So that's what I mean by kind of building that distance.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's really funny because I do the same with Paris' games. When great. I'm like, I mean, this season, for instance, I was sometimes in Argentina, and so I would watch the game with the Argentinian, TV, but I would put the French radio.
Okay.
So but I would, thanks to the time difference, I have the podcasts coming from France. So I don't listen, I don't watch the result before. And so I use the podcast, but I can make the podcast at the same time as the video, so I don't have the delay.
I see. Okay.
That's the pro tip.
The funny thing is that like the broadcasts, local broadcasts are in Valencian, which is Catalan, which is a slightly different version of Catalan. I speak fluent Spanish, but I also understand, like, because of this, I learned Valencian pretty well. I can understand it. I can't speak because I never practiced, but I can understand it very well. Like, I really like really a lot of phrases. It's really close. So it's a fun way to learn a language too, I think, for me, at least for me.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, that's also how I learn languages most of the time. It's just, I go to the country and then I'm forced to speak. You don't have a choice. I think you should go to France now, because like if you know Spanish and a bit of Catalan, then French is going to be super easy for you.
Yeah,
maybe you already speak French.
I tried to learn when I was in India. Like I used to have friends that, I don't know if you heard of this organization called Alliance Française. It's like a cultural organization that's around the world. They do French things, French cultural things, and also do classes. So I took a class, and I had friends that would come to my city in India and teach French for 2 semesters and go. Like that's part of their college work. So I used to hang out with a lot of those friends, and there was a point in time I was getting to a point of making small sentences, but I kind of lost it after that. So. As you said, if I get the chance to live in France for 6 months, I can definitely pick up a good amount.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, well, you're welcome anytime. Let me know. I'll connect you. Actually, that's funny. That makes me think. When you were saying in the end, when you watch a lot of games, it's kind of like all the teams are a bit different, but also similar. So first, the nerd in me is like, okay, hierarchical model. It's like hierarchical models, just express that. But then also the traveler in me, I've traveled in a lot of countries, and by doing that, I actually had the same reflection, about countries in the end, and it's like, that's why now when I end up hearing about very nationalistic people, and unfortunately that's the case right now in France, where we have a lot of these nationalistic vibes, unfortunately. I'm like, this is really weird to me, because I'm like, you really think the country is like really something really special, like a special snowflake, but not that much. If you travel, you'll see it, in the end it's still people. People are really similar. And so I had the same experience.
problems are similar. I think it's everyone is trying to, like at a global level, everyone is trying to get to the same place. I think, in terms of basic needs and then, once you get to the basic needs and then maybe a little bit long, just trying to secure their future. Like to me, like those two would cover 99% of all what people are trying to do. And so, and it's the same in every country. Now, every country, just because of where they are and what their history is, has certain level of resources and certain issues and certain geographical things. So when you're born in a country, it's not, it's almost like it's sort of whether you're born in the US or you're born in India or Lebanon or France, that changes so much, right? But there is no, but beyond that, I think it's all the same. And all the differences we've created, I think, that's something that we've kind of created along the way. But it's not, when somebody is born, really, they don't really know who they are.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I say all the time. And I'm like, well, I was lucky to be born in France. And it gives me a great passport, but, I didn't do anything for that. It's just random luck, so I don't really understand. And then, when you travel, you actually talk to the immigrants, that then people who didn't travel a lot, say they come and they steal jobs and so on. I'm like, but when you talk to people, you see they don't, come to France to do these evil stuff. Yeah. It's just, they want to live, and live better most of the time. That's that. But well, thank you for that parenthesis. Definitely appreciate it. That makes me think about my first career was in political science. So of course, these topics are still dear to my heart, even though I don't work on that anymore. But so getting back to football, and I'm not surprised in the end that we ended up talking about social thing, because football is also a very social and emotional endeavor. But so to go back to one of your experiences, the one at the Seattle Sounders, I'm curious because here you basically participated in founding the analytics department over there. What were some of the key goals that you had in mind and you wanted to achieve with this?
Good question. Different levels to it. First of all, the first few years they hired me to build like an athlete management system using fitness data, heart rate data, GPS data. That was what I was hired to do in the beginning, because I was hired by head of performance, who is actually a great friend of Patrick, also David Tenney. And so that was my first job. And I didn't have any experience in exercise science or sports science or anything like that. But obviously I had experience building systems, database that are based on a database and has a web interface that will take in some data and put out some reports. So what I was tasked to do was, well, we just bought GPS and heart rate for the team. Can you take this and help us make sense of it? Because we want to inform our decisions about how players are training and what we need to do. If they overtrained the day before, should we take some measures next day? Or if they didn't get enough training stimulus the day before, should they get more the next day? So they had the domain knowledge of what is a good training day, what is a bad training day, what is an overload, what is an underload. And I was then tasked to take these GPS raw data and build a system that would then capture that. So on a purely technical side, and this was back in 2013. So technically, the first system I built was a standalone SQL server that is in our I think it's like it's basically an on-prem server, and my choice of language at the time was on the front end was C#. And so I built like a web interface using C#. and then have the SQL Server in the backend with stored procs and RDBMS data. And so we get this data from, and also we didn't have the API from the GPS or heart rate at the time. Now there are APIs. So I had to take these data like CSVs. Basically, all these softwares in sports, they come with their own little kind of software. All these kind of technologies come with their own software. So from that software, you can download a CSV, and you take the CSV and then upload it into my system so that you can have this global where we used to do a lot of tests for players to see their readiness and fatigue levels, put all this information together to come up with a continuous story of how this player has come here. And obviously the goal is always to prevent injuries from happening, and to know when a player is at risk and try to take remedial action before the injury happens. Now, one of the funny things there is that a lot of people talk, like there was a time when people used the word injury prediction models. The problem is that your data is never clean enough, because anytime you know a player is at risk, you're going to intervene, and that data is useless to predict from that point, right? So a lot of sports science data suffers from this problem. And even I think, in general, like I think it happens in every sphere, is that when you know something is going to go bad, you're always changing the inputs because you don't wait to see something to go bad before you're not experimenting. Like, I give you an example, going back to my previous job at Bing, like, now it's not previous, now it's like four generations ago. Like, we used to do experiments of, we change the color of the font, or let's say we change search results page. So when you search for a query, you get a list of results like blue links. What we used to do is that, let's change the font size from 13px to 14px. So then we'll serve this new experience, which is 14px, for 2% of the users. But the rest of the 98% get the same old experience. We run this experiment. We call this experiment. We run this for 2 weeks or whatever time. Knowing how much data we need, we'll run that for that period of time. And then analyze the data, compare. We have a lot of metrics to say which one is better than the other. And then we would analyze. Now, there you're doing a pure experiment, like A/B testing. But a lot of times in real life, you can't do A/B testing, because there is a real cost to not acting on when you know something, right? So anyway, yeah. So my first job was to build that. That was what I did the first 2 years. Then create reports, just capturing everything that happened in the training. And I did a lot of things of like, collect my own data, like to classify what are the different types of training drills. And so I had to build like a little, like a small kind of nomenclature language that classifies different drills as different things, so that when I go into the system, I know what is the drill, how many players were involved, who were involved, what is the size of the pitch that was used, what are the rules, like it was goals, no goals, goalkeepers, whatever. So yeah, I did all that in the first couple of years, and then after that, I was tasked to do what I was really wanted to do in football, was to do the scouting and recruitment platform to analyze players, analyze games. So then I started doing that. So the goal there always for us was number 1 or 2, like you want to, obviously, like this is Captain Obvious, sign good players, avoid making bad mistakes. But I think that, with the salary cap league, very little money. If you make a mistake especially with the designated players, or the players that make the most money, you can only have 2 or 3 of those, and so you end up having to be really careful. So one of the things that I always describe my process as is that I am always I can live with as many false negatives as possible, but I can't afford a false positive. So the job ends up being, you analyze 1,000 good players or 1,000 players, you reject 100 good players, and you want to sign a good player, right? So I'm okay skewing towards missing out on some good players and some high potential, as long as I don't make a mistake. I think that was kind of for that group of for the where the money where we have to spend a lot of money. So that's how I would describe our process was. So it was a lot more like like I guess we call it, band pass filter type thing, where we might eliminate some high potential because it comes with high risk, but we always eliminate the lower section. And so you always kind of end up with a steady kind of a above average, type of decision. That's probably where we want it to live most of the time. So that would be like a rough way and in terms of technology itself, similar technologies at the beginning, like say use the same database, same front end, but with the for the visualizations we used Tableau at the beginning, and then we added some of the models we built in R, and some of the models were what I would do was that I would experiment in R, and then or Python sometimes. Python very little in the beginning. And then basically once the model is ready, I would just code it into SQL stored prod, because that would make it faster to surface. And I'm also not a great software engineer, so that was not my strongest suite. So I had to do things that would get me quickest to where I'm good at, or what I really want to do was analyze players and things like that. So that would be our structure. And then as we gotten into 19, I think 19, at the end of 19, we kind of moved from the Stone Age to cloud. Like we moved off of the on-prem SQL Server onto a cloud-based system where we migrated everything to the cloud, which was a huge endeavor to move everything, especially when you don't have a lot of resources. And it's like, hey, what did you do last 3 months? Well, we just squared one. You won't see any result of it because we're going to be the same for, whether it's coming from the cloud or coming from a SQL server on-prem. So that was kind of, that's how and later on we added we got bigger data sets like tracking data to do like more, more custom metrics, line breaks, and, better models for expected goals. And so as we got tracking data, and, those are towards more recent times, so that's roughly what we built there.
Damn, yeah, that's a lot of work. And thank you for walking us through all that. And I think there is very interesting nuggets of wisdom and information here for listeners, even if they are not working in football. So let me ask you the question in a more general way. From this experience you had, what would you say is something that's applicable to someone who is doing data science in the organization, and they have to build this kind of infrastructure, and then they have to use it and help people use it in the organization? Which principles can you draw from that, and would say people would be able to apply them even in an organization outside of football?
Yeah, I look at this as very much the core of this is making a decision. Like everything in life is a decision. Whether you want to go to a restaurant, which restaurant, that's a decision, right? I mean, now that's a very low leverage, smaller decision. You don't really kind of repent much whether you go to one or the other. But when you're talking about a decision that involves 50% of the salary budget of a team, like we're trying to talk to this player that is really good, going to be one of the best players in the league, but he's going to cost 50% of our salary budget. So when you're making that decision, that's a big decision. Like you can't get that wrong, because if you get that wrong, you set the team back for a few years. So I see all of this as the process is that there are two things, the decision and the process. the process you use to make the decision. So analytics is a tool that can help the process of making decisions, that can help you get around some of the biases that humans have, and will make it easier for you to make a good decision. So I can give you an example that I've used in the past. So let's take a car. You're driving a car. Now, any car these days, it has the rear view mirror and the side view mirrors, right? And you're even subconsciously are using them to when you're changing the lane, or in general when you're looking, you're always seeing who is around you, right? Just so that you have the sense of, if you see something suddenly happen in front of you, you need to know which way to swerve, but you can, or you want to change a lane, that, if you have a side view mirror, that's really easy. If you want to go left, there is the mirror, you look at the mirror and then you can turn. And there is still a blind spot, meaning that you still couldn't be perfect. You still want to kind of turn your neck and see. That's what the good practice is, right? So imagine driving a car without those side view mirror and the rear view mirror. You can still drive the car. You can still change lanes, but you will have to turn your neck more often back to see what's there, to the side to see what's there. And there is more likelihood that you miss something that was there, or you miss a blind spot. So it puts a lot more effort on you to make sure that you don't make a mistake. I see analytics as these tools that, if the rear view mirror is right in front of you, it's so easy to look at it. You just kind of lift your eyebrow a little and you see it. And so, like, okay, there is somebody behind me, whatever. So I look at it that way. So I think the whole process of making a decision, you want to arrive at a good decision. And this process, there are various tools you can use. And one of those tools is analytics. And what it does is that it takes some of the emotions out of the equation, some of the inherent, like, confirmation bias and other types of biases that we all have, that take some of those out, or at least point us towards them to act upon them. So that's how I see analytics. So it's now, we talked about a car. Earlier we were talking about football. Signing a player that will make half of your salary budget. How to use it? It's the same thing. I think, like any field, like, ultimately you want to make good decisions. And another thing about decisions is that, and you want to make this process a repeatable process to continually make those good decisions. Like, and because on a given basis, any organization is making dozens, and if not dozens, hundreds of decisions on a daily, weekly basis. So you want to have a process that guides you. This is how we make these things here. Now, that doesn't mean that it would be always perfect. Just like even having rear view, side view mirrors, it still be an issue. Sometimes there is a blind spot, and you shift a lane, and there might be an accident, or you might come really close to an accident. But that doesn't mean that. But it has still helped you avoid a lot more. And as I said earlier about injuries, the moment you do an intervention, the fact that you prevented an injury from happening, or the fact that you prevented an accident from happening, means that there is no trace or evidence of that, but that's something that is part of it. And so, that's how I look at analytics. And when I see what I do at a more fundamental level is help teams get better at install a process that they can repeat, and make good decisions one on top of the other.
Yeah, that's actually something you've talked about in a very interesting conference at StatsBomb last year that I've put in the show notes about compounding of decisions and I think that's a very good point, because there is a lot of also not necessarily from modelers, I would say, but from people who consume the models, an idea that the models can be, sudden game changers, kind of like how things happen in a movie, right? Where it's like, oh, there was a before and an after, and it was very clear and black and white. But most of the time, it's much more the accumulation of small decisions that were all going in the right direction that in the end steered you in the path you wanted to ended up being at. It's like if you want to get in shape, it's way better to go to the gym very regularly and do 1 hour than go 1 day per week and do 3 hours. So this idea of compounding is, I think, very interesting. And I'm actually curious from your different experiences, because you've worked with a lot of clubs, and that means a lot of managing teams. So very different people in front of you. How do you think has analytics transformed the decision-making process within football, particularly in the areas you know best, so signing players, game strategy, and if you have an example of how analytics led to a successful player acquisition, that'd be awesome.
I think that analytics had a big impact on the sport of soccer. I mean, I think if you talk about baseball, I think you could easily say right now everyone is like, if there's just a lot of attempts to just score home runs, right? In baseball, just like in basketball, either they take a 3 or a 2-pointer close to the basket, because that's come through analytics. Similarly, in football, if you look at the long range shot, where the player taking like a 30 shot from 30 yards out, that's almost gone now. Or it's a very low percentage, because I think I would say that's a direct impact of analytics, where we've kind of baked it into the heads, saying that taking a shot where it's a 2% probability to score is not a good decision. And again, going back to like the decisions, like even on the field, we're always talking about player decisions. Like, did the player make the right decision to pass the ball here, or did he have a better option, right? But anyway, like coming back to analytics itself impact, I think that's the most clearest sign of analytics impact on football is something that you could see if you count the percentage of shots from outside the box, which would be 18 yards out, in say 2010, and you compare that in 2015, and you compare that same number take any league in the world and compare that in 2020 and 24, you would see a steady decline, in that number, probably down, I would say 15, 20% from where it was. And that's due to just this becoming more mainstream. So that's like a great example of this. And in terms of like my personal examples, I think that one of the things, as I said, like analytics is one tool in the toolbox of making these decisions. And one of my personal, like the way I try to operate, or I try to message everywhere where I've been, is that don't treat analytics as some a separate, this is a separate entity. I think that in terms of decision making, it's another source of information. So it's another tool to help you make that decision. So I wanted that as integrated as possible, where on a daily basis, my ideal scenario or my ideal club would be on a daily basis, there is data or analytics is used almost involuntarily. It's just a part of the culture. It's just that, well, we're trying to sign, or let's say, take a different example. We're looking to, this player's contract is expiring in 18 months. What do we want to do with him, right? So there are certain principles. Okay, what is his age now? What is his age in 18 months? So where is he in the career phase? Whether he's past his peak or he's going to pass his peak, how long of a contract we can give him, and what would be the market value. Like those are kind of table stakes. Like you have to have all that information, and that's all driven from the back. That's all powered by analytics or analytics department, but that's something that you almost like expect it, and that you follow that process. It becomes part of it. That's how I see it. So I find it really hard to separate out and say that this was an analytics decision, because it's never like that. Like if you go inside any organization, football or otherwise, not one piece of information is responsible for a decision, or a huge decision, like, a big decision, that especially ones that are successful. I think they always have multiple people involved, multiple departments, multiple information. So it's always like a committee-based approach. And then there is also something I've heard from in another talk, where when you have more than one person making the decision, like when you have a committee, what it does is that it normally means that humans are very bad at recognizing their own biases, but they're really good at pointing out others' biases. So when you have a committee there is a good one, not like, where there is trust, and where a group of people that work together and they know each other well, then you know that when you discuss a decision, then it becomes more, you point out all the flaws in how you came there. And it usually ends up being what is left over after you beat it up, as they call it, and you usually end up with a good decision there. So I think I will see it that way. Like I think that in my time at the Sounders and even afterwards, I've tried to do that, and I know there are moments where obviously when something goes right, like you feel, okay, definitely I wanted this to happen. But again, like I think at the end of the day, I always say that the only people that deserve any credit for success is the players themselves, because they are the ones who are playing. Everybody else is, I don't know. I just feel like it's hard to separate that process. I think that's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Does that make it hard then to sometimes having to say something that's based on the model or like your analysis of the data that's not going in the direction of that the other parts of the organization are wanting to hear? What's your experience on that? Basically, what I'm asking here is, how do you deal with resistance?
Yeah, so I think this is a difficult question to answer, just because a lot of times, if it is strangers, like let's say I just joined a club and I don't know anybody there. I'm just, obviously I know them, who they are, they know who I am, but we don't really have a relation. It will be harder to go into a meeting and say, you guys are looking at this wrong. This is my analysis. I think we should do this other thing, or we should sign this other player. I think the way to do that would be I think it will take time. Obviously, when you start out, it's hard. It's almost impossible. I think you want to build that trust in the beginning. And the way to build that trust would be to first listen and understand where they're coming from, and what is the idea here? What are we trying to do? What is the decision we're trying to make, and why? And learn about the background of it, and then have smaller conversations with individuals, or maybe small group of individuals, about what you can do for them, and how, and you have to convince them how what you do will help them do their jobs better, because ultimately that's the buy-in, right? The buy-in is ultimately people will use your stuff if they believe that it's useful for them. That's as simple as that. So you want to build that buy-in, and the way you build that buy-in is, again, like, show that you understand, or what you're talking about, and that you understand what their problem is and where they're coming from, and and then build a solution. And over a period of time, let's say whatever, like maybe it takes 6 months or a year, I think you will get that comfort, and they will get that comfort with you, where they are comfortable you challenging them, and you're comfortable being told that you're wrong, and have that argument. At the end of the day, like your job, if you're, let's say, if you're like an entry level analyst, or maybe you just have 1 or 2 years experience, or you haven't really built that much of a cachet of credibility and all that, you want to make sure that they at least they listen to you and they consider what you said, because everybody, the trust gets built at its own pace. You're not going to dictate that, because that's a two-person, that has to happen from both sides. And so, and again, like, you say your piece and you go back, and let's say they didn't agree with you, and they did the thing that you said won't work, and it doesn't work, then that's a counterfactual of like, okay, well, he said that to us. But then there is, I mean, it's not as simple. I admit that, because especially in sports and football, where careers are short term, you make a bad decision, 6 months later you may not have a job, and that's also where the resistance comes from, because when there is so much short termism in organizations, people will want to do it their own way, and I can't fault that. Like, if you put yourself in the situation saying, if I get this wrong, I'm going to get fired. So then, will you listen to people around you, or will you want to do like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way. I think that I know I'm in this job for a reason. I'm going to do it this way. And so I think that's what happens a lot of time. And that gets kind of mixed with that people are resistant to change, or people are resistant to analytics, or a different type of information. But I think there's like, we need to tease those things out.
Yeah, that makes me think back to a lot of my personal experiences, because I'm often, the modeler who comes into the organization, and sometimes we have to give some hard truth to the teams we're working with, and also it makes me think to something that Paul Sabin said in episode 108, where I asked him a similar question, and I think he made a very good point by saying a great way to, build the trust with the people you're working with at the very beginning, as you were saying, is actually to try and confirm their priors at the beginning. And so if you have a model that you can show that it confirms their prior in something that's actually true with some degree of certainty, then you're building trust here, because they will see you're not here to, destroy what they've done. You're here to help them make better decisions, as you were saying, because in the end, that's the name of the game. And we're building models, but in the end, you can have the best model. If it's not used, well, it's useless, even if it's the best. So you need that trust internally. And that question, how to build that trust? I think it's a great way to do it here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that that's something that we tend to do even with models that we build, just to get like a first sense of whether this is doing the right thing. If you're trying to list the 10 best fullbacks in the world, and you build, your model determines, like, ranks the fullbacks in the world, and you look at the top 10, and then you generally tend to confirm the world view. The first thing you check is, well, whether 7 or 8 of these make sense to be in the top 10, like, because there would be a lot of consensus around that. So that's, as you said, that's the same kind of logic there, where you confirm the priors, and you saying that, at a fundamental level, this is what this model is supposed to do, and if you can get that confirmation that we all think that this is doing the right thing at a fundamental level, then that's the first step. Then you can go from there. And I think there's the other part is that I think with football analytics, there's a lot of limitations to the data. We've been talking about models and data. There's a lot of limitations. So you can't answer a lot of questions. Like a lot of questions around in football surrounding what happens off the ball, because a lot of the data available is just event data, which is changing, but still today, like overwhelming amount of data available is event data. So you can only answer certain questions. You can't answer a lot of things around how the player plays off the ball. Even with the tracking data is just a two-dimensional XY location on the field. So you don't really know whether he's facing the goal or he's with his back to the goal. So that information is not widely available today. So then you're still approximating, and you can still find ways around to get a proxy type of thing. But what I'm saying is, like, there's still a lot of questions you can't answer. And another way to build trust, or it's a more of a, I would say, is like a counterintuitive way, I would say, is be ready to admit when you can't answer a question that I don't know. Like, I think that, or my data, or the data we have, or the models I have, cannot answer that question. Because a lot of times I do see the tendency where people want to say yes to everything, that I can answer every question, or try to extend themselves, overextend to answer a question, even though you know deep inside that probably that's just not, there's no signal there.
Yeah.
I think that's very important too, because the quickest way to lose trust is when you get found out that way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's something I say a lot on the podcast also. So now listeners are going to be like, oh, great, that again. But I think, yeah, something I say a lot is indeed you have to be able as the modeler to, communicate what the model can say, but almost even more importantly, also what it cannot say. And that, to your point, is extremely important, I find, because that also goes a long way towards showing that, you're not here to show that what people have done before is completely stupid and now you're going to fix everything. But on the contrary, that you're building on the shoulders of giants, if you want. And in that, yes, here is what we can do, but that, no, we would have to do something else, or we would have to modify the model, or we would have to collect more data. Something I find usually that's the case here is when people have causal questions, but the model or the data most of the time can only answer correlation questions.
Yes.
So like, yeah, here we know that happens at the same time. Doesn't mean one thing causes the other. If we want to do that, we can, but we need to run that experiment, ask the players to, wear that ring while they sleep, so that we can measure their sleep. And then, yes, we can answer that question if you want, but right now we cannot. And that, I think, is very interesting.
And so, like, a lot of times I used to have these conversations with this is all at Seattle, with the assistant coaches, and who have a little bit more time to discuss concepts and things after training. I would have this discussion, and I would talk about correlations and say, well, from the data I see this is what's happening, and then they would then go on and explain they'll ask me, well, do you know what's happening tactically there? I would say, no, I don't know. Because I want to learn. So, and then they will go on and talk about, like, well, this is happening because we told the player to do this, X or Y. And the way football works is that when I move this player here, it creates a chain reaction of reactions from the opponent team, and that opens up this space. And so, like, there is a lot of nuance. Now, I don't have data for all of that. And that's the problem. Like, you quickly get to a point where you reach the limits of what you can explain with the data you have. And then, and then you get to a point where, so I agree. I think that's you have to understand the causality, and a lot of time correlation. I mean, it's a cliche, but it is true that a lot of times correlation is not causation.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And sports is definitely a great endeavor where you are most of the time interested in causality. And I think it's a great playground for nerds like us because most of the time people are interested in causality, but you have to do experiments or quasi-experiments or be smarter about how you go about the model. And I find that fascinating for sure because myself, for instance, at the Marlins, I have access to extremely talented people who know so much about baseball, much more than I will ever know. And they also know about niche, like they did a PhD in strength conditioning. And so they know about that intersection about how do you make a player fitter and bigger, but at the same time, how will that impact his performance at bat, for instance. And that is the kind of stuff that I don't know about, but that's just gold as the modeler because I go talk to them and that helps me get where I could not go before because I could not even have imagined that the data I'm seeing right now on my computer is actually a result of that change they made. So yeah, as you were saying, I think here it's also a very good way to also make other people in the organization stakeholders of your models. Because then if they have a stake in your model and seen the model having better results, that means your model is going to be better, but also the model is going to be more used, which is in the end what you want.
Yeah, I think that I was going to point that out earlier is one of the ways to build trust is work together to build metrics or specific metrics. And there are various techniques here, like you can do some of what they want. A lot of times you also encounter this in the analytics world is where a decision maker wants to just confirm his decision. So he wants some data to prove or confirm what he was thinking was right. So that in itself is not, in isolation, is not a bad thing. You always want to confirm whether what you're doing is right or not. But the motive of that could be different. Like sometimes if it is just to kind of a box ticking exercise, then it's not good. But if it's in general as like a checks and balances, I don't think it's bad. But you could use that as a way to get them in saying, well, these are the metrics that confirm with what you say, but there is these other metrics that don't confirm, and this is what those metrics are about. And I think that's another way to start building that trust. But I think universally, if you work together, collaborate on the models and on the metrics, they will get used more.
Yeah, and I think that's where also the Bayesian framework is extremely interesting because you need priors. So you need to talk to domain experts. And that's just naturally included in the modeling workflow because then even before running anything on the model, you're going to have to define the priors. And so you're going to have to talk to the experts. And I find that super interesting to also when you can, what I do often is talk to a domain expert, tell them that, okay, so your priors are these and these, plug that into the model structure I currently have, generate prior samples, and then show a few graphs to them that they can understand about the thing we're studying, and then ask them how reasonable that looks to them. And that's also a good way for them to constrain their priors, to calibrate them, and actually sometimes to update their priors. Or also a lot of the time for me to change the model structure because my model is too wide in a way. It allows for too many scenarios. Most of the time it's these. That's actually interesting to me that a lot of people, when they start using Bayesian stats, they fear that their priors are too constraining. But most of the time, because you have a lot of parameters in the model, what ends up happening is that actually the model is too permissive and you're allowing scenarios that are way too extreme in reality. So it's a funny thing that often happens.
Interesting.
So we're running a bit low on time here. I don't want to take too much of your time. Can I keep you for a few minutes still?
Sure.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I have, well, actually a question that popped into my mind when you were saying that, well, data, like good data is actually a challenge sometimes in football still. What kind of data would you like right now to answer a question you really care about these days in football? And right now you can't because you don't have the data. Like, if you had a wish to make to a genie right now and they told you, okay, I am the football genie, what data do you want for which problem?
Pretty. Yeah, I think. Well, I think right now what we have is like, I'll give you a quick summary of what data we have. We have what we call event data, which is just recording of all the events on the ball, and some metadata like X, Y, location, stuff like that. So that's about 3,000 rows per match. And that data is available the most widest. So you could get that data for second division Ukraine or third division Korea. Like, you could get that, between different data providers, but you could get like across the world, like just the coverage is wide. The next data set is there's the thing called optical tracking data, which is it's the camera systems installed in the stadium. Those are very much like you only get the data for your league because it's a league-wide deal and it's like a lot of restrictive, very expensive also. And then there is like the intermediate thing that has come on in the last 5 to 7 years called the broadcast tracking, where they're just taking the broadcast video and using computer vision to generate tracking data for on screen and have like algorithms to predict, or at least for physical data purposes, like just predict where the players are when they're off screen, just to get their kind of distances and things like that. So these are the three major data sets. I think one that's coming up soon is a Hawkeye data set, which has pose, they say. I have not looked at it. That's obviously the data size is much bigger. I think that's probably where the biggest thing to measure because we're all measuring proxies of, like in football, like my coach, one of my coaches at Seattle, he had this definition of what is a play in a football look like. So there is the execution of the play, meaning you are passing the ball. Vision or decision making, where you're deciding what to do with the ball, and perception of perceiving what's around you. Like, so for a player to decide, he's looking around what's around him and then deciding and then making the action, which is the actual execution. Most of the metrics we have today just measure execution. So we don't really measure decision making. We do proxies. Even with proxies, we're really far behind in measuring did the player make this decision? Unless you go ask the player, really, we don't know yet. So I think that what I would want is I would want to be able to quantify the decision making, because at the end of the day, you want to make good decisions. Going back to what we've talked a lot in this podcast, it's about the decisions, and the more good decisions stacked on top of the other, the better. And so, how do we make players take better decisions? Can we give them feedback? What are good decisions, right? So I would want a data set to be able to measure that directly, not proxies, but that would probably mean I need like I'll tell you how complex that would be, is that from the line of sight of the player, what can he see? The field. When he has the ball, when I have the ball, when I'm scanning, what do I see? Like, I need that information to be able to, or if I can record what a player saw before passing the ball or before deciding to shoot, that would give me the real information to answer that question. Now we're talking we're going from trying to answer the causal parts of it, trying to address the causal parts. Obviously, that looks a little impossible right now. If you think about it. But like that's probably where in that direction, anything that will lead me in that direction, get me 2 steps forward, I would want that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. That would be super fun. I mean, then the type of models you can do all that also just increases exponentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it probably involves like you have to put something on a player's shirt or something like obviously wearables like cameras these days, you can put them anywhere. Like can't be intrusive, but there is a lot of different things. Like I know some clubs have done some experiments with like players wearing goggles, and there are these kind of 360 systems where there are some exercises, and the whole thing is like fitted with cameras that is recording a lot of things. But still, that's not the real thing. That's just a simulated lab version of it. I still don't think that comes close to capturing the real stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But damn, I'm sure that's going to happen at some time, and that's going to be so cool. Yeah. Then the kind of models we can make would be incredible. Something I am curious actually about myself, and that may be one because right now my mind is really working on a project. I have to translate war from baseball to football actually, and so my mind is really in the replacement level mindset, and what is the contribution of a player in comparison to the replacement level. Something I'd be very curious about is doing that for coaches, and that, like, I don't know how to do that yet. I don't even know if that would be possible at some point, but I would be very curious to have the data to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a little difficult project because I've had to do some work around that in the recent times. But it's really hard to separate coach effect. It is very hard. Like it's just I think from my experience of trying to do it and probably mostly ending up with something that I'm not 100% satisfied with. I think most coaches are just like most players or replacement level, meaning that so just that there's not that much difference between one and the other if you give them the same rosters. But then there's definitely like the outliers that are really good. And like I think the one thing where I've heard this before is that a good coach will improve the team a little bit. Like a above average coach will improve the team by some amount, but like a bad coach can really take it down. So like, but then there's like this whole middle that probably is not that different.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fascinating question to me also because, well, that's a causal question, right? So and that's so hard.
And it's so hard, and this is just again, like I don't think this is a 100% causal inference that I was able to make, but I think it's the kind of educated guess or type of things that you can do. But again, that's not causal. That's again like you're going to heuristics. It's they're what they are.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fascinating to me because I think it's even harder than for players because players at least they are on the field. You have a lot of years of data. They can stay in a club for years, which is not the case of a lot of managers, less and less actually. And usually the managers who stay in place the longest are considered to be the best. So you already have a sampling bias here. Yeah, but also, especially now, the managers consider the best are also the ones who get the best players.
Best players.
So
yes.
It's like,
there is multiple
sampling bias all over the place. Yeah.
Yes, and then it's like, it's a different magnitude. Yeah, it's just hard. If a coach does well with a smaller group, he's rarely stays there for long enough to actually be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, look, like Xabi Alonso at Leverkusen, it's rare, like, and I'm not sure he'll stay there for longer, like at least next year, but then probably he'll jump to something else, to much bigger
club. The other thing is also like, obviously I can give you another name, Kieran McKenna, who's at Ipswich Town, 2 promotions in a row from League One to Championship to Premier League in 2 years. He's still there, so he's going to manage in the Premier League. So I'm really fascinated to see that as an experiment. But even then, even if you know somebody's good, it's hard to say that what is the, if you put him in a different setup with a different group of players, like, is that like, okay, if he wants to play the same way, then you have to maybe change half the squad at a new place, and it still won't be the exact same players. And so there is a lot there, like I think in terms of manager search and manager identifying who's a good manager.
Yeah. But I think it's very important too, because not only I find that very interesting, but also clubs spend a lot of money on managers. So it's not a decision you want to take lightly, because also if you do, like, the contracts can also be very long. Like I know right now, I think Julian Nagelsmann, for instance, he's still paid, I think, by Bayern München, even though he's the manager of the German national team, and then it's like they still have to pay the contract, because otherwise it's going to cost them millions to let the whole staff go. So it's like, really, if you don't make the right decision, it can be very hard to bounce back afterwards.
I mean, that's not an uncommon thing. A lot of clubs, I know clubs that are still paying their previous 2 managers. And that's, it's not very uncommon, which is pretty bad. I think there's a lot of that in football.
Yeah. I mean, and that's weird. It's just, when I heard that was possible, I was like, how's that possible? It's incredible. So, I mean, I don't think there is enough data right now to do really good job with that, but I think probably it's something that clubs are gonna look into after some point.
I think they're already looking into it. Obviously the more progressive ones are already looking into it. It's just that I think just even you don't need a perfect answer. Just having that discussion and going through the process and getting to a point where you reach a dead end. Like, okay, I can answer question 3 out of the 10 questions, but that is still better than 0 out of 10. And you make the decision in a little bit more, like, without that information. So for sure. Like, I think there's ways to go there.
Yeah, true. That's actually a very good point that also I make a lot to my students. It's look for a good enough model and good enough priors, and not the perfect model, not the perfect priors, because they don't exist. Right. Just get to the good enough point. If you can already help make a better decision with that, that's already very useful. And I mean, definitely if I would have access, if the multiverse existed and I had access to it, I would definitely do a random sampling of the coaches, very regularly. I would I'd be like, okay, all coaches get, 3 years in the same club, and then we just change at random. np.random.choice, with the number of coaches, and would just change everything. That would help a lot. That would be an RCT. Would help a lot.
I mean, I guess like there is maybe a scenario with AI in the future, if you can do that type of simulation across coaches and across teams, and it's more, it's still a simulation, but maybe you can get the problem is like you have an issue with the fidelity of the data in soccer. So you don't really have that level of data to be able to do like a realistic simulations. So maybe that's the path. Like, you get to a point where you can simulate that.
Yeah. No, for sure. We'll talk about something else, but it's like also my point is it's also harder to define what's a successful coach, right? At least players, it's easiest. It's not easy, but easiest, because it's like, well, a forward has to score goals. A successful coach is not only a coach that wins stuff, So that's really also the hard thing.
Yeah.
Actually, something I'm curious about is in episode 108, Paul Sabin, he said that the scientific mind he would have dinner with, which is like the last question I ask every guest, would be Virgil Carter, who is, I don't know if you know him, but he's US football player, NFL player from the 70s, and he wrote a paper about expected points in football while he was playing in the NFL. That's so cool. And so I was wondering, but just, a bit more generic, did you have experience with players or coaches like that who were really nerdy and who were really willing to have that kind of analysis? This is just curiosity from me.
Not to that level. I've definitely had coaches that are very interested in how I arrived at certain numbers, and would talk about it. A lot of times, I think a lot of times we had a good relation, but the coach, they always were looking at like, well, we want to prove you wrong type thing. But yeah, but it was more like, but I have a good relation with them, so I was okay with that. Yeah, but not to that level of nerdiness, for sure not. To your question, I was like, I would say like I was going to give you two names. One of them probably not a scientific mind, probably, but a really beautiful mind is, I come from India. I would love to have just a chat with Mahatma Gandhi. That would be the one I would probably, that was the first name I can think of. If I want to go scientific, I would want to talk to Srinivas Ramanujan, the famous mathematician who only lived like 33 years. And his equations are still being like, people are figuring out the proofs. Yeah. He's actually from the south of India, close to where I was born and brought up. Okay. I would love to, hang out with him. I know he must have been awesome. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would be an amazing dinner. Damn. And that's the first time it happens in the show that someone answers the last question before the last question. So, thanks, Ravi. That's great. I still have firsts in that show after more than 100 episodes. Actually, so, I mean, I could still ask you a lot of questions. I have so many in my mind, but, let's start closing out here, because otherwise I'm gonna draw all your strength and you still have to work afterwards. So, one last question before the very last question. Just in general, I'm curious to pick your brain about where you see the field of soccer analytics heading in the next years. And if there are emerging technologies or methodologies that you think will be very interesting, if not game changers.
I'd say a lot of work in the tracking data. So you get better tracking data, more fidelity. As I was talking about the Hawkeye data set, stuff like that becoming more widely available. Right now, they only collect for one league, I think, and there's not much. If you're only collecting for one league, it's really not that useful, because for player recruitment, you need that data across a wide spectrum. The problem is that it's never going to happen in soccer. That I would say never, but I'm sure we can come up with a technology at some point where the second division Argentinian game, we could have Hawkeye data, like, as outlandish as it sounds today. Maybe there are technologies down the road that could answer that, or that could do that for us. But until then, we'll have to probably settle with using the broadcast version of tracking data and the improvements in that. I guess the other thing is a lot of work will be done on the predictive metric side. I think a lot of metrics in soccer are really good at describing things. And I think predictive, and then, I don't know much about prescriptive, but probably predictive is where a lot of work, I think a lot of progress to be made on that front. predicting like that's one of the biggest questions among many, but probably the big one is like how to predict like the career progression of a young player.
Yeah.
And at what age are you going to have enough confidence in that prediction, right? Is it 14? Is it 16? And part of the challenge of the problem is that development is not linear, and so then it's not like you come up with the model and it's not that easy, and then there is a lot of things that go into it that are not even in the control of the player, where maybe, for example, like this happens a lot at different clubs in their academies, is that they have the three best prospects play the same position. So let's say at age 16, and so what ends up happening is that at least one of them will end up having to play, like there are multiple possibilities. One of the possibilities is that one of them playing slightly different role, or not his best position. So that could decrease his kind of projection right there. Another could be that the player will leave and go to a different team where the setup is different, so that could decrease his potential too. And another could be that the team made the wrong choice of figuring out who should play his best position and who are the other two that are expendable, right? Like the team may have made a wrong choice and picked the one that probably was not going to go anywhere, right? So all these things, like I think that's type of questions, in terms of when I say predictive metrics and predictive things, I think I'm talking about things like that. Or a player moving from a league to league to predict what will be his performance in the new league. It's just like right now it's very much not very reliable, those predictions.
Yeah, I mean, so first, the example you just gave about the three players, that made me think about when PSG had the luxury of having both Ibrahimovic and Cavani, and both were playing 9, but they could not because of how the team was structured, and then Cavani has to play on the left side, and he was way less good at that position because Cavani is really light, 9, really striker, and then afterwards, once Ibrahimovic left, he was the 9, and he was just incredible, and he actually beat Ibrahimovic record of goals through like best goleador from Paris, and then recently Mbappe took him the title, but that's definitely that. But more generally, what you're saying also echoes the topics in baseball. Like in the end, the name of the game is a lot player projection, and also projection from one league to the other. Baseball has a bit more time in a sense for each player because you don't have to put players in the major league as young as football has to do. So you have a bit more time. But like the name of the game is the same.
But you're making a decision of who you want to keep in the system to go into AA or single A or 3A or something.
And finally, if on a very selfish note, I'm really happy to hear that predictive metrics are very important and interesting because you need models for that. And I'm a modeler and I love modeling. So, I'm like, oh, that's great. That's going to be a lot of fun and nerdy things in the future coming our way. You hear that, listeners? That's great. Lots of models.
For sure.
Awesome, Ravi. Well, you already answered the last question of the show. So the other last question I ask every guest at the end of the show is if you had unlimited time and resources, which problem would you try to solve?
I think we just talked about it. First question, is it in football analytics or is it in general?
Whatever you want.
I guess in general, I think I would probably want to solve the problems that we talked earlier about, just people having access to food, water, shelter. I think that's probably what I would want to solve if I had infinite resources first, because in the grand scheme of things, sports is a nice thing, but we're not saving lives. We're not, sure, we're making some people happy, go home after a game, if we win, and but I would totally want to change lives of real people in a real way. That would what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, definitely understand that and completely agree. Awesome. Well, Ravi, that was an absolute blast. Thank you so much for taking so much time and indulging all my questions. As usual, I learned a lot. And as usual, we will put resources and a link to your socials, your website, and also the different concepts we've touched on during that episode. That makes me think, while you were talking about priors and talking about coaches and managers about that, I added a link to a Python package that's called Prelease. That's basically a toolbox for prior elicitation. Definitely encourage listeners and whoever is working on a Bayesian model to use that, because that really helps you visualizing priors, defining them, and the latest release they have done is just absolutely awesome. So definitely take a look to Prelease. It's in the show notes, and a lot of other stuff. So thank you again, Ravi, for taking the time and being on this show.
Thanks a lot, Alex, for having me. It was great talking to you, and obviously picked up a few things, and I'll follow up on with you offline. But it's been great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Whenever you want. This has been another episode of Learning Bayesian Statistics. Be sure to rate, review, and follow the show on your favorite podcatcher, and visit learnbaystats.com for more resources about today's topics, as well as access to more episodes to help you reach true Bayesian state of mind. That's learnbaystats.com. Our theme music is Good Bayesian by Baba Brinkman, feat. MC Lars and Megaran. Check out his awesome work at bababrinkman.com. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country. You can support the show and unlock exclusive benefits by visiting patreon.com/learnbaystats. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. You're truly a
good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change calculations after taking fresh data in. Those predictions that your brain is making, let's get them on a solid foundation.